Hello, everybody. Welcome to Talkin Toons with Toys, the podcast where cartoon toys talk about niche and obscure animation and cartoons. I am Barney the Dinosaur from Adventures of the Trio on the YouTube channel, although you probably know me more from the show Barney and Friends. Although now that that show has ended, I've been revamped a la Toy Story in this new show, Adventures of the Trio, on the YouTube channel. I think I already said that, but whatever. So I am talking as a plush toy dinosaur, along with my cohorts SpongeBob and SponBalloon SquarePants. Hi, everybody. I'm SpongeBob SquarePants, or you might know me more as SpongeBob SquarePants. I also star in Adventures of the Trio, where I've been redesigned as a papercraft bobblehead creature type thing. Still trying to define that. And I'm Spun SquarePants, where on Adventures of the Trio, I've been designed as a giant flattened balloon. A little easier of my definition. Yeah. Anyway, hey, on the show, we form a group called the Trio, hence the name Adventures of the Trio. So we are here in this podcast talking about niche and obscure animation and cartoons. We actually just came off from recording the first episode of the podcast. As if you were here because you watched the first episode and you enjoyed it, first of all, thank you. Yeah, we learned a lot about ourselves after rewatching that episode. We learned a lot about our style of doing this podcast. One of the big things I noticed is, well, the big thing that I noticed is we are not confident hosts at all. I'm pretty sure we stumbled through every other word in every sentence we had during that conversation. Like the guest we had spoke so eloquently about the show that he enjoyed. Meanwhile, we were standing there pretty much just talking like Porky Pig on Tourette's. Like basically just also, I noticed we talked so fast during that conversation. It's a miracle that the guest even understood what we were saying half the time. And also, I'm pretty sure I said the same words pretty much every time I started talking. So yeah, we learned a lot about that episode, and we're also trying to incorporate new stuff. You probably noticed we have a new intro song, but yeah, so trying something new and also trying to take it easy, try to slow things down a little bit because yeah, that first episode, while we loved doing it and we loved the guest, yeah, it was brutal. It was definitely brutal on our side. Oh, now don't beat yourself up, buddy. It wasn't that bad. Oh, don't try to sugarcoat it. You were just as bad as I was. Yeah, but I do what I do best. I learn from my mistakes and then I work to improve it. I can name several examples where that is not the case, but I'm gonna leave it aside for now. But the one thing that is certain, the one thing that we will stay consistent and committed to do is we will keep talking about cartoons because we love talking about cartoons, we love cartoons, and we love people that enjoy cartoons. And this guest that we have on today, I would go and say, is a true lover of cartoons. He is a Christian gamer, musician, soloist, mechanist. I'm pretty sure I'm saying that wrong, but it's an amazing CV, so I will keep saying it. That's what it is. He is also a writer of short story, flash fiction, fan fiction, and poetry. He has worked on games and he has wrote, directed, and wrote more than 12 animated student pieces. Ladies and gentlemen, Cohen Olson!
Thank you for having me.
A pleasure to have you. Thank you for coming on. And yeah, just a pleasure to have you. A pleasure to have you. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I think I'm faring well today. Today's a nice day, even though the weather's not as bright as I'd like it.
Yeah, not looking too good in here either. But we're glad to have you, and we're just glad to be talking about cartoons with you.
Yeah, I look forward to it. It's a great show.
Oh yeah. Your show was definitely very interesting. Before we start talking about that, I just want to know, like, what sort of influence has cartoons had on your life, and what sort of cartoons were you interested in, or what genre were you interested in, pertaining animation and cartoons, either when you were a child or even still to this day.
As a child, I was mostly interested in anything new, nothing that stayed stagnant or was boring. I think what drove me away from the dramas that my family would be into was the mundaneness of it all, and cartoons and animation in general brought something fresh and live for me to watch and engage with. I usually stuck with the action and adventure type stories, and later on that flourished into more of an interest in something with depth, not just with moving pictures for the sake of moving pictures.
Hey, we love new stuff on here. We love bouncing, flashy animation. Well, he also said he loves cartoons with depth, so that puts you out of the running. You're saying I don't have depth? I'm saying you are uninterested. So there. And I take that as an insult? Good, take it. Anyway, I love that. I love that. And I love that. And I think that shows in the show that you picked for today because today's topic, I'm very excited about this. We are diving into a world of talking birds, dragonborns, and eliotropes in a show coming to us from La France, Wakfu.
Yes, quite an amazing show, and it was born through a community from an online game before anything else, and it exploded more, from what I understand, on the animation scene, and now it's on its fourth season.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing when I looked into it. That it came out of a multiplayer game, which is very interesting. Although when you watch the show, it does kind of have that that sort of cutscene like game style animation. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a bit. And now this is actually an interesting show because we had heard of this show. In fact, we actually watched the show way back in the day. I think like when it first premiered. Although for some reason it sort of left our peripheral because I guess we had other things we were watching, so it kind of, we kind of fell off of it for a little while. But it was always in our mind powers. So when you pitched the show to us, we were like, "Oh, this is it. I cannot wait. I cannot wait." So yeah, there's a lot to talk about in this show. Before we get into it, let's just give a brief synopsis on what Wakfu is to the people that may not know. So Spawn Balloon is going to give us a brief synopsis on the show and the history of Wakfu. Spawn Balloon, thanks, Bay. So cartoons in, as you said, in the France or French animation has had an actually surprising boom in recent years, is due to the various popular shows like Miraculous, Ladybug, Tales of Ladybug and Cat Noir, Totally Spies, Code Lugia, and in this case, the show Whack Fu. As mentioned before, it was inspired by a multiplayer online video game of the same name, but the TV show Wakfu actually features the story of a 12-year-old boy named Yugo who discovers he has mysterious powers and allows him to create portals. As the show progresses, he teams up with a group of adventurers and they take a journey on to discover the origins of his mystical powers, the origins of himself and his family, and a mystical destiny that will take him far beyond the outskirts of his home and the outskirts of an ever-growing magical world. So that, in essence, is Wakfu. Back to you, B. And for the love of all things, don't be a lot brain. Again, that's a very weak joke compared to last week, but I'll let it go. So yeah, so again, we knew about the show. We watched the show a while ago, left our peripheral for a bit, and then we got back to the show. So a lot to talk about, but I just want to know from you, Cohen, what about the show? Like, what is this? Like, why is the show your guilty pleasure?
So I'd say it's my guilty pleasure because of how I first got interested in it. I was watching it because it was something new, and the tone that it sets from the very beginning was very mysterious, very secretive, and you get breadcrumbs along the way, and it kind of draws you into the story as it introduces new characters, new settings, and again back to the depth of the story. The further you get into the show or watching the series, the deeper it goes, actually pulls you back to the first season from the third. It ends on a major cliffhanger that's going to be picked up when the fourth season airs internationally, harkening back to Yugo's ancestry and his entire species. You find out, and he might look like a human child, but he's actually um, how would you put it? He is part of a race that is timeless, technically never dies, is only reborn as themselves, and they go from old age and or death back to childhood, and they repeat the process and they retain their memories. So it's in a sense, it's a type of immortality in and of itself, and it's very interesting how you delve into that.
One of the things that I found interesting about the show, and this is like a preference to us or to me personally, that I'm not an entirely big fan of like lore heavy, like high fantasy, like types of media, like like Lord of the Rings, like type esque, like that, yeah, that kind of thing, like high fantasy or like super like serialized like lore dumbs, things like that. So going into the show, I was a little bit afraid that it was going to have something like that, and it does kind of have that kind of high fantasy like lore stuff, particularly when you go back into the game and you find that the game actually has a little bit of like lore heavy stuff that kind of pertains to the show. However, what I do like about the show is that while it does have a lot of lore baked into it, it's not like super like heavy duty. Like you can go into like any of the episodes or any of the miniseries like the miniseries that you recommended, and it's easy enough that you can understand what's happening without having to have all the context moving forward. Like in the miniseries that you pitched for this, it's very simple. Like, oh yeah, something's happening that threatens the world. They need to get this like big power source in order to defeat the thing that's threatening the world. There's a group of adventurers with magic powers and all that, and yada yada yada. So like the classic tropes and like any kind of fantasy story, without having to know like all the like backstory and context moving forward. You know what I mean?
I understand that completely. Some things are better in their simplicity, and the way this delivers, episode by episode, it's almost always self-contained while it adds to the story as a whole. There are several filler episodes which are actually secretively lore heavy that they're also easy. I wouldn't say easy listening, but they're easy to watch and easy to understand. Easy for anyone to take in leisurely. Um, and any episode with Rule in it is definitely a comedic one. Definitely one for the funnies.
Roll is definitely a funny character. I will agree with that.
And the more you learn from that specific character, because he is a very old character. He has probably, I mean, outside of Yugo, he has the richest backstory, I'd say. Um, and again, He's of a one track mind, and it's money. He's as bad as Mr. Krabs, if not worse.
Ah, hello, that's my cue to jump in. Yeah, I wanted to jump in here because one thing that we found interesting, and well, I don't know about interesting, but one kind of comparison that we made while watching the show, and I jumped in here because this is actually pertaining to my homage. One thing that we know, I think that we kind of found a little similar. Uh, while watching the show. And to be clear, this is just what we thought. This is just a similar that we discovered. So there's a high possibility we might get added by fans with this one, but again, this is just our preference. So there you go. Yeah. Anyway, and while watching the show, it does kind of have a little bit of similarity to Avatar: The Last Airbender. Just like in terms of like the tone of the show, oh, and like the whole like all the tropes that were discovered. Like a boy discovering that he has greater power and that he's destined to save the world and all. Like all that stuff. So even watching it from way back then, and we kind of had that little inclination, and then going a little further, it kind of confirmed that for us. I don't know. That's again, that's just how we feel about it. Cohen, are we far off in that similarity?
I can see it only as far as how it starts, not how it ends. Because an
That's fair.
Avatar, he is a type of demigod of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
Aang is, and later Korra, but she
Got
falls off the map, so I don't want to think about her personally. But if we're comparing Avatar: The Last Airbender to um, Aang's Avatar: The Last Airbender to Yugo and Wakfu, then I would say they're only vaguely similar.
I mean,
Um,
He reached the Avatar state. Hugo essentially reached the Avatar state in the mini movies and movies. Essentially, that was the Avatar state.
I can see that comparison. However, if you look closer at Percival, he is an actual god. But he's knocked his memories out, and he finds out later that his supposed mentor is actually his long lost son. That's deep lore heavy, but it brings everything back around to the comparison because it's not one to one. If we're comparing just the two characters, possibly they both go on long journeys to discover more about themselves and their abilities while trying to save the world around them. Loosely, I will give you that. But specifically, because then you also in season three have a fight for the new gods, and then
Mm-hmm.
that throws you right into season four, which is about to come out. Um, technically, Wakfu already has. Sorry, Ankama, the producers of Wakfu, already have a streaming service specifically for the Wakfu series that you can watch with subtitles right now. They're not all released, but you can start watching them right now if you are um, part of their Kickstarter. Um, but the series itself, it's not one to one comparison. The two characters possibly have similarities, but that's as far as I would go personally.
Yeah. Again, we're not saying like, oh yeah, it's like direct copy from Avatar: The Last Airbender. No, we're not saying that. We're just saying in terms of like a few similar like tropes we're trying to mention, and it does bear a little bit a similarity to Avatar: Last Airbender, and the fact that Wakfu was like heavily inspired by anime kind of helps prove the point. Again, we're not saying like it's like a one on one, but I'm just saying in terms of the tropes, there is a little similarity in there. Again, don't at me, people in the comments or the fans or whatever, and or whoever's watching this, don't at us. That's just what we thought.
I can understand with that bit then.
Yeah. So anyway, and what do you think are the issues or sort of the like lower quality parts that might make this show not as popular as it should be? Because obviously every show isn't perfect or anything like that. And so like what about this particular show that you think could be the reasons that it's not as popular or a little more obscure compared to the mainstream cartoons?
The quality of the filler. There are some shows like I'm directly adding Bleach here because Bleach is 90% filler. Um, I love it though. Um, as a tight Kubo, awesome. But the show itself, when it was produced, is all filler. This show, Wakfu, the quality of the filler served to attempt to bring those who were casual watchers of the show and maybe not focused on the lore as much, but watched it maybe like a person would watch The Office on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for this show, it it didn't it was not well rounded in the filler. In the main content, it was very well rounded. You could see what they were focused on. The filler kind of fell off because it got boring. Some people that weren't already invested in the show, if they started where there was a filler episode, or they got to a filler episode and they didn't have enough interest, it wouldn't hold their interest. So that's where I think it fell off.
Sure, sure. And going into the more technical side, you mentioned that it was essentially a very crowd-funded like Kickstarter show.
Yes, it was only Kickstarter funded for each of their seasons. And there was a season 3 that was oh no, sorry, it was their technical second season, but it goes in between seasons 2 and 3
Hmm.
in lore.
Right.
Um, and it fills in the gaps between the two, and it's a rough time jump. Anyway, so you wouldn't understand. A watcher wouldn't understand just watching the main seasons 1, 2, then 3. You'd have to watch the special episodes as I sent to you about in between seasons 2 and 3. It's only about 3, maybe 4 episodes, roughly an hour long each. Um, that was a season they didn't get enough crowdfunding,
Right.
and that's the result of that is that they couldn't tell the story in its entirety. They had to push for another crowdfunding session to get another season out, and then they had to change the story along. However, that miniseries was so effective in its storytelling. It might have
Hmm.
felt a little rushed, but it always stayed to the point. There was zero filler in that entire miniseries because they didn't have time for it. It was action packed. There was tons of fighting, meaningful dialogue. If you're looking for action, that was the season to start with.
Right. And that's one of the things that I like about this. Because, like, yeah, funding is definitely a big factor in anything, especially animation. Although I will say, I do find it like a little humbling that it is a Kickstarter-backed show because it gives a little more like levity to other artists or animators that want to create like shows like this. Granted, again, it was made by a studio, but again, like if you're like an inspiring artist or animator, and your dream is to achieve something like Avatar: Last Airbender, I mean, again, don't at us, but the very likelihood that that could happen to anybody else is kind of unlikely. It's kind of very much unlikely that something like that can happen to anybody else. So the fact that a show started out essentially as a crowd-funded show kind of gives a little more like ground into it, because as you know the animation probably isn't the greatest, and I will admit the animation was a little bit jarring when you first see it, although like you said, and you kind of get past that as that it is beautiful to look at. And I don't know, that's just what I think. I will say again, going back to the technical side of it, I do understand and where the fun comes into play because from what we saw, again, this is just our preference, what we saw of it, and I think I would say one of the other drawbacks of being an underfunded show was the fact that the lip syncing was a little bit off, and the voiceover like expressions didn't exactly match the emotion of the characters. You know what I mean?
Exactly. They actually have technology for that right now. That's been in development for some years. It's already been put in the works. It's for shows like this for re-lip syncing. And what they do is they take audio that you're feeding it, and then they redo the phenoms for the mouths for each character. It's really impressive.
Right, but I'm assuming they didn't have the funds for that.
Whether or not they were actually overfunded for this latest season. And it's thanks to the success of the previous seasons that they were. Um, but in the past few, the already released seasons, no, they did not have any of the funding for that. The earliest they would have been able to do it is season 3,
Right.
and it was definitely not even in their radar at that point.
Right. Which leads me to, which actually, that's actually a good segue to lead me into the next question. What are some of the good parts of this show that you think made it work, despite, all that stuff that we said about what made it didn't work?
What made it work was how everything connects. Again, we were talking earlier about how you can almost start at any point and it's still engaging.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from select filler episodes, but when you put everything together, when you take it all in, you see. I don't want to use the word majesty because that's a bit dramatic, but you can see the complexity and the heavy detail that's been put into this entire series, and it actually, I think it outdoes the mobile game myself. I think it goes far and above, even though the mobile game might have more technical lore.
Mm-hmm.
The show itself kind of gives it that relevance, the reason why you'd want to engage with it. Um, you start talking about Yugo and his ancestry, and then you watch all the way up to the end of season 3, and it's like everything's been thrown out the window. Everything you just learned is different. And then you start season 4 and you kind of have to pick up the pieces again. But as you do, things start realigning and making more sense. And it's like you're rediscovering the show. And it makes you want to go back and watch it.
Yeah, there's a little something for everybody. It has that idea of darker tones, big and also like little comedy already in it. That's something that I think anyone can enjoy. And speaking of the entirety of the show itself, again we were making this comparison that it was similar to Avatar, and again in some aspects it is. Although I will say the big difference between this is, I don't know if you play Dungeons and Dragons at all, but if you watch the show in its entirety, it's straight up a D&D campaign.
I absolutely agree. It could have been a D&D campaign written out of somebody's basement that just took off. And there are some great stories that have started like that just
Mhm.
start from imagination of friends just getting together, writing a story or a campaign together. Easily, this could have been that.
100%. And you see that in a variety of different episodes. Like in a lot of the episodes, they're always in a group, they're always fighting together in a group. You have like a ranger, you have like an archer, you have a magic user, you have all that stuff. I think in one episode, they literally said that when one of the characters was being possessed by a demon, one of the other characters literally said, "It's a level 4 shoo."
Exactly. Yeah. When Percival was um being possessed by his own sword, that was hilarious, and it brought again the depth. It brought, like you said, it had a game like quality to it,
Mm-hmm.
It could have been considered a whole boss fight, which it technically was. And then they all had to come together and fight, and then he ended up having to fight from within. That
Mm-hmm.
was entertaining, and it was essentially him hitting himself the whole time. That
A
was
lot.
Yes, that was great comedy. And then I think the one thing that pulled him out was his sweetheart Evangeline. I think that's what ended up doing, if I do remember right. I haven't watched that specific episode in a little while, but it was quite the awesome battle. It definitely was.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually a good segue into the next question. So, yeah, again, we mentioned the good parts, we mentioned the bad parts, but in your personal opinion, what do you think is the sell of this show? Like, is there a particular episode or an arc that you would recommend to people who don't know about the show, or any like episode or arc you're trying to convince them to watch this show? Like, what is the selling point of this show to you?
Well, I guess that depends on which point you want to get into, because I'm personally a bit of a romantic, but I also love action and adventure. So um, there's a romantic arc between Yugo and the Sedita princess. I'm sorry, her name slips my mind right now.
Amalea?
Amalea. That's right. And it's hinted throughout. It's peppered throughout. But then season three, um, it is heavily laid thick. Season two, you see um a huge thing go about. I'm sorry, no, that was is either season two or season one. You see a point where Yugo is accelerated into time. Everybody, as they move forward in this one force field, their age is exaggerated to show them the difference between them.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone, like uh, Yugo, only gets bigger after he moves feet, which is representative of centuries. Amalea, she changes much more quickly. She's still alive in the same distance in this relative time, but she's also aging at a rate greater than Yugo is. To him, that pulls him from her, and he's hesitant to pursue her until much later in season three,
Mm.
by which there's a big love triangle between him, himself, and Amalea that's very complicated. Um, but if you want to get into it right off the bat because of the action, I'd suggest jumping into the miniseries.
Mm.
Absolutely, it is. There is hardly a minute of rest, and when they are finding out. They're trying to figure out where they're going next. It is amazing. They're all going after the Heliotrope Dofus, and it is a wild ride. Definitely, if you're going just for the action, the miniseries, go for that. If you're going for the adventure, season three, it is all adventure. There is much action, but it is all adventure. Um, Again, each of these different there are different selling points throughout the entire series. If you like comedy, I start from the beginning. Wait for the pacing to pick up, and then season two, you'll be settled into it. Again, there's just so much to pick from. I've only given a few examples, but you could start from any of those points, really.
And just for the people listening, the miniseries that he's referring to is called Wakfu Quest for the Iliotrope Dophuses, which I believe is a three-part, sort of mini movie esque limited series. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. That one, hey, that one was the one that you suggested. I said, and again, going back into like the biggie, like lore heavy, like high fantasy stuff. Even though we didn't understand a few things, a few contextual things that if we went back to the start, we would understand. It's still pretty easy to, uh, get what's going on. Like understand who the characters are, understand what's at stake, and understand what the power source is. Is yeah, again, pretty easy to start from that one. And I do like how you suggested season three, okay, because uh, uh, because I think you also mentioned mentioned that, and that also features as the two characters that you talked about before, Evangeline and Percival, which I think was a very impressive has of little arc that you brought up in season three, episodes 1 to 3, and and honestly, both of those suggestions are actually a good idea. Um, uh, talking about Percival again. I mean Percival. Well, hmm, truth be told, for a while now we thought the name was Percival, not Percidal. So that's kind of a fault on our end. But Percival is actually a very good character to talk about, and and it reflects both of those suggestions so well, because Percival is a very interesting character. Because hey, you mentioned Rule was like the character, the comic relief in the show. Um, Starting out, we honestly thought that Percival was the comic relief, and a lot of times in cartoons, and the comic relief is there. He has some impressive feats. He's just there for the comedy, and in some cases, he can be a little annoying, which we did kind of have that implication with Percival, starting out. Although we thought his character arc was so engaging in these episodes, at the end of this miniseries, uh, that he became sort of very comical, very selfish kind of full of himself, and then just seeing this whole arc uh, throughout the series and throughout the miniseries, especially his romance with Evangeline. I thought that was incredible. Incredible the fact that those two got married. Again, spoiler alert. Well, I'm gonna be frank. If you're watching this podcast and had not seen this show, there are gonna be spoilers. Uh, I should probably make that note at the start of the episode. Again, we're learning, and but yeah, that whole romance between Evangeline and Percival, also I thought was so impactful and what really made that miniseries work, and especially season three, and, and especially from the fact that he had such a character change, and like even from the start of season one, and turning from a white character to a character that might have been had the slightly tan, which that is an impressive feat that you kind of skirted that line from him becoming a white character to a black character essentially. But it was a good like threading the needle a little bit. But yeah, Personal was definitely a great selling point if you want to talk about both those episodes and the miniseries. So yeah, I thought that was a really good thing.
Yeah, the personal. He definitely started out. I think most of the characters actually started out in the first season as somewhat. They're all trying to bring comedy to the whole show, and then as they get fleshed out and their characters are specifically defined, you
Mm-hmm.
see Hugo isn't as childlike as he wants us to think.
Mm-hmm.
Roll isn't as greedy as he wants us to think, and Personal isn't as selfish as he wants us to think.
Mm-hmm.
The three of those specifically, and even Amalia, she isn't as stuck up as she wants us to think. She used to be a very entitled princess, but then she got to actually show that she cares about people. And
Mm-hmm.
Evangeline had this woman warrior thing, which was admirable, but she would isolate herself from everybody for a while. And it was Personal's pursuit of her that brought her back into the group. And
Mm-hmm.
all of that rounds out together. You see that character growth. It's amazing.
Yeah, character growth is definitely something that will help sell any show, honestly, to make it elevate it even more, while still keeping their main like character, character. How do I say this? Like character like biographies almost, still having those traits, but allowing that growth to follow and keeping the comedy as well. Like Quest for the Heliotrope Doofuses had definitely had a lot of comedy in it. And I will say, despite the fact that it's action, it still had its room for comedy.
That's for sure. They had some very well done timing with that. There was
Mm-hmm.
one specific scene. where they were fighting. I think it was a cat god, and it was like this rivalry going on between them, and it was back and forth, and it was
Uh-huh.
hilarious.
Yeah, yeah. And in the last episode of that miniseries, is this one little joke that we picked up on, and when Yugo collects all the doofuses, and again reaching the Avatar stage, quote unquote, and he goes off to help Percival fight the ogress, I think it was called, um, and then and then the talking bird character that was helping her out said, "You're going the wrong way." That's
Yeah,
just that's just a little thing we catched up on.
definitely, definitely. And Ogre's death himself, I think that character. Now that you mentioned earlier about there being certain things in the miniseries that weren't addressed, and
Mhm.
thinking about it, some of that lore wasn't even addressed in the first or second seasons, except for in brief and backstory. Um, and it was in the game, it was more hinted towards.
Right. Yeah, we looked into that. Because we in the game there was like this whole talk of the ogress and that he lived 1,000 years or something like that. Or who was collecting the doofuses for like a childhood crush or something like that. I don't know. It's a little confusing.
Yeah, that was confusing actually. It might have even been. I'm not sure if it was for a crush or if it was for his mother. I don't
Yeah,
remember. That's a
yeah,
very specific detail for anyone listening that is not leaned on too heavy in the series, but for some reason it's brought up and is the main conflict of the miniseries.
yeah. I will argue despite the fact that we didn't know too much about the ogress, it did still work in the miniseries with the fact that the ogress was the talking bird guy's like child or something, like child. Well, again, I don't know too much about the lore or to know the story about that, but it still played it off like, oh yeah, that's his child, so they don't want to kill it, but they want to protect, but they're still trying to prevent it from destroying the world and everything. And then so again, context probably could have helped us there, but the way they choreographed it, it was still helpful to. Uh, uh, sorry, I don't know how to describe this. And what I'm saying is, it was helpful as it still worked to drive the story along. Is what I'm saying.
Yes, yes.
All right, so now going. If you had the power of control over the show, like picture and Canna Animation, and the French animation studio that created Wakfu, gave you the keys and said you can do whatever you want with Wakfu. You can do anything you want to it. Onto it, you could recreate it or revamp it, or keep it going, or like reboot it or whatever. What would you do if you had the power of control over the show?
I would cut the fat. The filler episodes that fell off mostly. Um, I would rework some of those to where they fed more directly into the story instead of just serving as purely backstory. While it's good to see the how well rounded a character is, I think by putting too much backstory in there, you're losing the main point of the plot, um,
Right.
and then you're more distracting from the whole reason that the journey is going on than the journey itself. If that makes any sense.
Oh yeah, totally makes sense. Again, it goes back to this, you know, you want to say a lot of history, but not to the point where it's like jarring or anything. Again, we don't like high fantasy, like lore heavy stuff like that. That kind of loses us. So yeah, we understand what you're saying.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I do appreciate the fact that again, you recommended season 3 to us, and I can definitely see like the comparison between the first season, the second season, the miniseries, and season 3. Because in season 3, it really feels like they found their footing with that. Like the lip syncing is getting better and better. The voiceover is better. Personal's voiceover character is definitely character I would say is definitely an improvement. Not to out that voice actor at all or the animation or anything, but you can definitely see a shift from season 3 personal to the previous iterations. So yeah, I can definitely see that season 3 found its footing, and we are very excited to see what season 4 could bring. Which leads me to the question, and what are you speculating that season 4 could bring?
Season 4 is going to address season 4 is supposed to be extremely lore heavy, extremely, because they are rebooting an entire universe. At the end of season 3, the main antagonist set a
Mhm.
hard reset on everything, except for everyone that was involved in the story. Everything else disappeared. Everything else is
Ooh.
gone. It is a void now. So they're either remaking everything or trying to fight to rewind that destruction. So it is
Ooh.
huge, huge.
So
But
yeah, folks. Oh yeah, go ahead.
by solving one issue, they caused a whole other problem.
Mm. Yeah, there you have it, folks. If you're interested in Wakfu at all, and you've heard all of this, or if you're watching Wakfu, go Wakfu, continue watching it and keep an eye on season 4, because yeah, that description, ooh, that sounds very, very interesting. Again, if you're into D&D campaigns, this is like gold standard for a campaign.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, Cohen. It was an absolute honor to talk about the show with you. We love the show. We can't wait to see more of it. And before we get out of here, do you have like anything to plug? Like any like social media or anything? Like where can people find you on the internet? And if you have anything like that.
If you're trying to find me, look for me on Instagram. You can find me. It's all one word. Art Thou Cohen.
All right, there we go. Oh, we'll put that in the show notes. And again, if you're interested in seeing Wakfu or you're a fan of it, I believe the first 3 seasons, and the mini series is available on Netflix. And what did you say that streaming service was? Oh wait, it's on Kickstarter. You said had the early season 4 that's on Kickstarter.
Yes, for all Kickstarting supporters, you get free access to, trust that included access to the subscription for viewing the subbed version because they don't have the dubbed out yet. The subbed version of the show.
Right. Right. So there's an opportunity to see season 4 there. But again, if you're just interested in seeing the show itself, all 3 seasons and the miniseries is available on Netflix. Thanks if you have the streamer. Uh, uh, Again, absolute pleasure to talk with you with this. And if you like the podcast, as you know, like and subscribe, and rate us on like all the podcast networks, and everything. And we're trying to find our footing. We're gonna make this work. And if you're watching this on YouTube, just like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out some of our other cartoons there. Uh, Again, and to our guest Cohen Olson, and to my cohorts, SpongeBob and Spoonbill and SquarePants. And so we want to say good night, and be sure to put your toys away when you're done with them. We'll see you next time.